Alright, check this out. A couple years ago when the Black Widow movie was announced, I had a lingering reaction of, wait, now? What's the point? What's left to accomplish this far into the MCU for a supplemental character that's had a purpose but never saw fit to take the reins in a solo feature? What could a solo film add to the narrative or character that'd be worth this effort? By the time of Endgame, it became even more apparent that any impact would be irrelevant. I don't care about comics, but as a character on screen, I like Widow. She's skilled, sexy, caring, fit the team since the beginning, and is part of my favorite MCU films. It helps that I've been a big ScarJo fan since my teens, but even I was skeptical about her getting a solo so late. Then the trailer dropped, and I got on board. Shit, if I'm getting more of something I already enjoyed and it didn't look like certified ass, then I'd go for it. This is a movie she earned and wasn't given until way too late. The one thing I didn't know was the director, Cate Shortland. Judging by the trailer, it looked like she knew what she was doing, but knowing how these things go, I can't always bank on it coming from a place of integrity. Don't mistake this for me questioning Shortland's integrity. I'm not questioning that. I'm denying Disney has any. It's documented that they and Marvel had an agenda when making their choice for director, but to discredit Cate for a decision they made was wrong. I wanted to know why her? What makes her an ideal candidate to them and the right candidate for this? What are her credentials and do they bring something to the character and story that she would excel in doing? From what little I found, none of her work involved big budget films, let alone major action ones. Bad sign from the start, but way too early to write her off completely. Marvel's taken the unlikeliest of directors in the past and those risks have paid off tremendously. Then again, sometimes it also fucking failed. Everything that I found was, first and foremost, drama. I don't have any issue with that. Not counting some early shorts she did, of which I only saw one, and a bunch of TV credits, I scrounged up the stuff I felt were her most complete works. The ones that, in short, showcased her vision and style and best summed up who she was as a creator. Somersault, Laura, and Berlin Syndrome. I should have seen him in order, but fuck it. I was already on a Teresa Palmer binge and I couldn't get enough of her. For the sake of cohesion, I'll start chronologically, which means I'll have to go to the beginning. Cate Shortland is an Australian filmmaker who I'd assume has been known in her home country for quite a while, having started directing in her 20s. She grew up in the capital of Canberra, moving to Sydney for university while also tutoring. Her passion was in photography initially, but morphed into storytelling through visual art. Not taking no for an answer, she took advantage of funding and support networks specifically for women established by Australian institutions and by producers within the domestic film industry. Something she's credited and recognized as not being commonly available in other countries and allowing her an opportunity that others would not have had. Shortland has praised Jan Chapman, an Australian producer, for supporting her career early on and setting up methods so new female filmmakers could finance their ideas. More so credited was Cate's friend and producer, Anthony Anderson, who backed her earliest works in the 90s and early 2000s. He pushed for her to focus and complete her ideas, culminating in Shortland's first feature film, Somersault, an independent coming-of-age romance about a teenage runaway starring Abbie Cornish, who up to that point I'm guessing was most known for Outriders. Somersault featured all the directional quirks, cinematography, and artsy stylings I saw in evolved stages for Shortland's later material. It swept the Australian Film Awards, and I mean, it dominated virtually every category and turned an up-and-coming female writer into a proven director. Cold and impoverished, it showcased a vastly different rural Australia than I was used to seeing in media as an American. From as far back as I've seen, Shortland's style has always incorporated expressionism in realistic settings from the perspective of deeply flawed people. On top of this, she emphasized rigor and hardship in character-first dramas, always standing by an ethos of trying to write fleshed-out male and female characters.
For me, the question is not about a male or female director. For me, the question is about rigor and intelligence. And I was sitting listening to a lot of what's been said today, and I don't think it's necessarily about being a director. I think it's about the writers, I think it's about the producers, and I think it's about the development And I think that's what we constantly have to ask ourselves. When you're seeing a woman in an action movie, when you're seeing a woman in a romantic comedy, what's being said today is we want rigour, we want layers, and we want to see their flaws. And it's not about directing, it's about the development process and great writers and great producers and great directors, male or female, coming together and workshopping those scripts until the female roles are as strong and interesting as the male roles, until they matter.
Do you like being here?
Yeah.
With me?
Yeah, otherwise I'll be sitting here on my own.
I agree with not half-assing the writing, but how does it work in practice here? Performance driven by Cornish's troubled Heidi and secondarily by Sam Worthington's Jo, it's a movie heavy on behaviors and personalities while being light on plot. Heidi's a vulnerable young girl who constantly makes poor decisions, often in exploring her own sexuality and experiences with those older than her. She mistakes sex for maturity and independence as living on her own. And as Shortland examines how a person can go through wrong decisions in her life, I went through states of intrigue and boredom. As much as I was watching a film, I was actually watching a person and all her problems. The story itself was simple enough, but seeing people fail over and over isn't just what Shortland wanted to show. It's something she lives by. Lingering shots, emotional filler, absorbing moments up close to immerse us in the lives of these people. Like her future works, it'll test the viewer's patience and throw them in uncomfortable situations before reaching solid ground. Among the three I saw, I'd categorize Somersault as the least entertaining or compelling. For me, it doesn't stack up to the more creatively rich offerings of Cate's other works. Its lesser appeal made me seriously question how it nabbed so many awards. Not that it's a terrible movie, but a basic one with some good and some bad, sometimes clumsily bad. I'd compare it to the football drama The Slaughter Rule with Ryan Gosling, which shares a lot of similarities, settings, and themes on social dynamics among youth and adulthood. After Somersault, Shortland barely did anything to capitalize on her success. For years, she didn't know if she wanted to commit to making films as she focused on her family. To say she was doubtful on her life's path was putting it lightly. She had since moved to Johannesburg, South Africa, working for non-profit groups while also traveling. Yet not long after Somersault, she would come across the book The Dark Room by British author Rachel Seifert more than once. The book consisted of 3 stories told from the perspective of Germans and the stain of Nazism associated with them. She was interested in doing the 3rd story, but was pushed and grew closer to the middle of the 3, Laura, about the children of Nazis at the end of the Second World War finding sanctuary. Being Jewish by marriage and having a connection to survivors from that era, Shortland's fixation came with apprehension, as she knew she was walking a fine line between making an honest effort to portray the Nazis from their perspective and making an apologist film. With the support of her family and her Jewish community, she took the project on, and this is where I start to really respect her. She went to live in Berlin, learn the material, study the history, meet with survivors and former youth and league members, binge on documentaries, and more, pouring years into a film she knew was an uphill battle to make. Then, like a boss, she fought to film it in German when she didn't know the language, which is like upping the difficulty just cause she could.
I'm Jewish and Tony's family are German Jews. So the idea of making something about perpetrators and what that means was very interesting to me. And what it means when the people that you love, you find out have lied to you and your whole society has lied to you.
Ich habe beim Stehlen erwischt. Ich weiß nicht, wie eure Eltern euch erzogen haben. Glaubt ihr, ihr könnt euch da einfach bedienen? Habt ihr das bei eurer Hitlerjugend gelernt?
Too often will a director take the easy route and film foreign characters entirely in English. Yeah, I know, it's a pain and no point being authentic if the film might suck or the actors can't speak it. She didn't want to adapt the book in English and sacrifice the contextual gravity of the story, and eventually the producers saw it her way and gave her the go-ahead. It turned out to be her most complex, personally affecting film, arguably her best. Laura, the titular character, is the daughter of staunch Nazi party members who are complicit in crimes against humanity. It's the immediate end of the war, and as her parents leave, she is responsible for fleeing with her younger siblings to their grandmother's house, meeting the unlikeliest of help on their journey. Like a folk fairy tale, it's entrancing and arcane in how it's depicted. There's so much beauty amidst the chaos. What I took away from it was how genuine it felt. The passing down of irrational hatred, civilization crumbling, crimes that will stain generations to come. From the perspective of a girl born into this warped reality, Saskia Rosendahl sold me on her rookie talent, creating a character that at every step of her arc tried resisting the truth. Her realistic portrayal wasn't without odd choices, but I saw how an indoctrinated girl supposedly firm in her fascist beliefs slowly whittled away convictions that had no real foundation in anything other than the Nazi worldview, a view that no longer mattered. Like any of Shortland's features, it's not an easy watch. I went in expecting come-and-see levels of hardcore, but it never came close to that. It's more artsy and vivid in its imagery than her other work, reliant on Adam Arkpaw's illustrative cinematography. There's an underlying evilness that the other two Shortland movies don't have that I hoped was more refined. Her lack of budget was the biggest limiter in fully envisioning a world gone mad. It needed the complete sense of overwhelming dread and scale of the war's aftermath, and the lack of dialogue often felt too on the nose when it came to stressing artistry. So there are only small scenes of joy, security, grief, pain, abuse, death, and abhorrence instead of larger set pieces that I felt was missing.
Komm raus. Das ist alles deine Schuld. Amerikaner. Eigene kleine Gefängnisse für Kinder wie dich. Schreckliche Orte, an denen Kinder gequält werden.
Impactful stuff, but the narrative is very loose and ambiguous with characters coming and going, some awkward transitions between scenes, an ambivalent sexual subtext, and unanswered questions that Shortland intentionally creates. Laura retains Cate's addressing of hardship, internal conflict, femininity, and personal growth. She isn't shying away from violence, prejudice, or a person's dark past. Actually, I'd say she could give a fuck about making the audience uncomfortable, which I love. It was at this point when I felt most assured that she was the director who could give a flawed, sympathetic character with a troubled past and internal struggle such as Black Widow the closure she deserved. So while my own dive into Shortland's films ended with Laura, it now brings me back to Berlin Syndrome where I started. Which means it brings me back to Teresa Palmer. For this venture, Shortland stuck with Germany, focusing on an even more intensely personal relationship drama. Not discouraged by filmmaking like she was after Somersault, she took on this project while the script was already written. She was drawn in by the characters, their power dynamic, the fluctuating need for each other, and how it speaks of Berlin itself. So Cate went to work doing additional writing, scouting, and becoming intimately acquainted with her leads. And while it might not top Laura, it demonstrated another respectable effort in playing to her strengths. Adapted from the novel of the same name, it's a story inspired by personal experiences of its author, Melanie Houston. The plot involves Claire, an Australian traveler solo in Berlin. Her trip has her going through former Eastern Bloc countries, photographing architecture and living life on her own. While there, she meets Andy, a Berliner, who she connects and stays with rather quickly. A seemingly normal one-night stand goes wrong when she's unable to leave his apartment. It turns for the worse when she finds out she's not just stuck here. Andy's preventing her from ever escaping.
Don't do that.
It's a psychological thriller emphasizing Shortland's interest in a person's capacity for love and cruelty. How someone can be drawn into something and cope with it as a new norm. It's here where I first got a look into Cate's depiction of sexuality, and it wasn't sexy. By her intention, it was extremely uncomfortable and disturbing. The music only added to this with its pulsating eeriness, in an otherwise melodic score. Shortland often portrays full nudity in her work, but this was in many ways difficult to watch. It's a slow, atmospheric film built on cold stylings within the urban decay of the East Berlin sector. The metaphor of totalitarian abuses and authority shape the relationship between these two people, with Palmer and Riemel being perfect castings. For a woman who looked like my dream girl in one movie, the despair in Palmer was a turn I had to get used to. Acting was on point throughout, with Cate often pushing them to take it to the extreme. Far more screen time and polish was given to Remelt's Andy than I expected. Claire is the protagonist and clear victim in this, but Andy is who Shortland pushes for us to know more about. For the monster that he is, he's a normal guy. A few quirks, but mostly introverted and socially awkward. While Claire is imprisoned, I saw Andy's wolf in sheep's clothing life and interactions to the point where I knew more about him as a person than I did Claire. While all the lead men in Shortland's films are flawed people, they aren't demeaned. They accentuate the women, able to hurt and help them grow as characters. It was Shortland who wanted Andy to be more fleshed out in the script than before, giving him depth and focus in the story. The emotional grind in his trauma-suppressed life is matched by Claire's repressed captivity.
What would be the worst thing I could ever do to you? Don't worry. I would never do it.
The toll the relationship takes on both of them throughout the film gradually evolves, so it's unfortunate that it ended with a bit of an unsatisfying payoff. For as strong as Shortland is in giving her characters intensity, she once again struggles with the actual narrative. There are many instances when I felt like Claire was one easy decision away from escaping, but plot contrivance kept her from doing it. Her questionable decision-making is in line with her peers in Cate's other works, but this time it felt the most character nerfing. All the warning signs in the world were there for her not to go with Andy, but for reasons not properly conveyed, she does anyway. I've traveled solo, and the movie does hit quite accurately how alone and empty you can feel, to where you want someone else to be there with you. It's just plot-wise it becomes problematic. It's a beautifully made film that touches upon lots of human horrors, directed by someone who actually gave a shit to go deeper and push it to its limit, but not without being too frustrating at times for me to truly call it great. It isn't geared toward a mass audience, and it never would be given the content and Shortland's tendency to go darker than one would expect. A tone I know she'll bring to future works. Not long after Berlin Syndrome, she was tapped for Black Widow, which brings me to the point of why I did this in the first place. Was Shortland the ideal candidate, and do her credentials make her the right choice? Yes and no, and only because it comes with the territory of a Marvel film. Marvel's always had their vision and degree of ownership when making their films. It's been that way for years, and it wasn't going to change for this. Any director worth a damn should be able to do their characters justice regardless of gender. Female-driven stories are something Cate has years of experience doing, and while simply being female isn't enough on its own to make her eminently qualified, it speaks volumes that they picked the right kind of person. I'm against reasons behind the decision, but not for the choice itself, if that makes sense. Taking damaged women and giving them value is basically her department, and having seen Shortland do it 3 times, I know that Scarlett's legacy as the character will be well served. While she doesn't have the familiarity with an endless budget, giant logistical scope, and huge action set pieces, Shortland is cozily supported by the Marvel juggernaut and can't fail. I don't think it's possible for them to mess this up with all their safety nets. From what little we've seen, it looks to have the same delicate handle Cate's always had, just bigger and for more people to see. Widow is a character who earned her place in the MCU, proving herself time and again in battle, even in the face of death, and as one of the most caring heroes. I didn't love her because she was superpowered, good at everything, and propped up as some kind of role model. I already know what her strengths are, so give me Natasha Romanoff with all her faults and overcoming it on her terms. And I think Cate will get that right. Giving her a send-off rewarding years of MCU merit and service that will endear her for good.